Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I had just moved to a new city for work and didn't have a place secured yet, so I rented a small furnished apartment and put most of my belongings into a storage unit. It was one of those 24-hour access facilities where you punch in a code at the gate and drive right up to your unit. My job kept me busy, so I usually stopped by late at night to grab things I needed. One night, around 11 p.m., I pulled up to my unit. The lot was mostly empty except for a couple of other cars near the far end. The place had bright overhead lights, but the rows of storage units stretched out into dark, unlit areas where the lights didn't quite reach. I punched in my code, the gate rattled open, and I drove to my unit near the middle of the lot. After unlocking the door, I pulled it open, revealing the tightly packed boxes inside. I was looking for a specific kitchen appliance, so I started shifting things around. That's when I heard a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped moving and listened. It was coming from further down the row. I glanced in that direction, but the way the lights were spaced out, it was just a wall of darkness past a few units. I shook it off and kept looking through my boxes, but then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like someone was knocking on a storage unit door. I stood still, suddenly hyper aware of how alone I was. Then a voice. You need help. I jumped. The voice came from a few units down in the dark. It was low, almost too casual, like the person already knew me. I couldn't see anyone. I didn't respond. Instead, I moved slowly toward my car, trying to act natural. The last thing I wanted was to seem scared and make myself a target. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Closer this time. I didn't look back. I just got into my car and locked the doors. As I started the engine, my headlights flooded the row of units. That's when I saw it. A storage unit a few doors down was slightly open. Not much, just a crack, just enough for someone to peer out. The tapping had stopped. I backed out quickly, my hands shaking on the wheel. As I turned toward the exit, I risked one last glance in my mirror. The storage unit door was now completely open, and in the darkness beyond, I could just barely make out the shape of a person standing there, not moving, not stepping forward, just watching me leave. I never went back at night again. After that night, I decided I would only visit my storage unit during the day. Even then, I never stayed longer than I had to. I had the unsettling feeling that whoever was in that unit had been watching me before I even noticed. A week later, I stopped by around noon to grab some winter clothes. It was bright, plenty of people were coming and going, and I felt safer. As I walked to my unit, I glanced toward the one that had been opened that night. It was shut now, locked with a heavy-duty padlock. I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a worker closing up, or someone living out of the unit who didn't want to get caught. I tried to rationalize it, but then I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the metal roll-up door of my own unit, near the handle, were 3 small dents. Tiny but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I ran my hand over the metal was smooth, like something had been pressed against it repeatedly. My throat went dry. I looked around at that. No one seemed to be paying attention to me. I debated telling someone, but what would I even say? That I was creeped out by some dents. I shook it off, got my clothes, and left. A couple of weeks passed without incident. Then, one night, I woke up to a notification on my phone. The storage facility had motion-activated cameras, and because I had a unit there, I could access the footage if motion was detected near my unit. My heart pounded as I opened the app. The footage was grainy, black and white night vision. At first, I thought there was nothing there. Then, I saw it. A figure, standing directly in front of my unit. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the door. The timestamp said 2:37 a.m. I stared at the screen, hoping the person would just walk away, but for nearly 7 minutes, they didn't move. They just stood there. Then, in the last few seconds of the recording, the person slowly lifted their hand. Tap, tap, tap. The video ended. I felt sick. The next morning, I went straight to the facility office and showed them the footage. The manager, an older guy named Rick, frowned as he watched it. We've had reports of people sneaking in at night, he admitted. Probably a homeless guy looking for a place to sleep. I shook my head. They didn't try to get inside. They just stood there. Rick didn't have an answer for that. I asked if they could check the logs to see if someone had entered with a code. After some digging, Rick confirmed that my gate code hadn't been used that night. Whoever it was had gotten in another way. That was enough for me. I told Rick I wanted to move my stuff out. I wasn't risking another encounter. I asked a friend to come with me that afternoon while I moved my stuff. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I had a weird feeling about the place and didn't want to be there alone. We loaded up a moving truck as quickly as possible. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Then, as we were finishing up, my friend nudged me. "Dude," he whispered. "Look." I turned. The unit down the row, the same one that had been opened that night, was unlocked again. The padlock was hanging loose. The door was open just an inch, and I swear I saw an eye looking out. That was it. I slammed my unit shut for the last time, locked it up, and told my friend we were leaving. As we drove out of the facility, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The unit door was now fully open, and standing in the shadows was a tall figure, watching. I don't know who they were. I don't know how they got in. After getting all my stuff out, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I told myself I was done with that place, that whatever had been happening there was behind me. But it wasn't. A few nights later, I woke up to another notification on my phone. My stomach flipped when I saw it was from the storage facility app. But that didn't make sense. I had moved everything out. I didn't even have a unit there anymore. I opened the app, motion detected, and the footage loaded, and it was another grainy night vision clip. The timestamp said 3:12 a.m. I stared at the screen, confused. My unit should have been empty. It was pointing at my apartment door. Someone was standing outside my door. They weren't knocking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there. I stopped breathing. My head started spinning. How did they know where I lived? Then, just like before, after several minutes of complete stillness, they lifted their hand. Tap, tap, tap. I dropped my phone. I scrambled to call the police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. While I was on the phone, I ran to my peephole. Nothing. By the time the officers arrived, the hallway was empty. No signs of forced entry, no security footage showing how the person got in or out. The front desk staff hadn't seen anyone suspicious enter the building. It was like they had vanished. The police took a report, but I could tell they didn't think much of it. Probably just a prank. One of them said, "It could be someone from the storage facility messing with you since you moved out." That wasn't comforting. I asked my apartment complex to change my locks. They agreed, but I still didn't feel safe. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound outside, but nothing happened. For weeks, I lived in constant paranoia. I double-checked my locks. I stopped going out at night. I looked over my shoulder in parking lots, expecting to see someone following me, but I never did. It seemed like whoever they were done. About a month later, I got a call from Rick, the manager at the storage facility. "Hey," he said, voice cautious. "You haven't been back here since you moved out, right?" I felt my stomach tighten. "No." "Why?" Rick sighed. "We have to clean out a unit today. The renter stopped paying, and when we opened it up, well, we found something weird." I didn't say anything. I could hear him hesitating on the other end. Finally, he continued. "There was a sleepy bag in the corner, and a few old food wrappers. Looks like someone had been staying there." I swallowed hard. "But that's not the weird part." He hesitated again, then said, "There were pictures in there of you." I went ice cold. "What?" "They were taped to the wall. A bunch of them. Some were from our security footage, but some were closer." He cleared his throat. "Like, from your apartment complex." I felt like I was going to throw up. Rick exhaled. "Look, man, I don't know who this guy was, but he's gone now. The stuff was old, like it had been sitting there for a while. I just thought you should know." I thanked him in a daze and hung up. I never went back to that facility. I never got any more notifications. Whoever they were gone, I hope. I used to live in a city where walking was my main mode of transportation. It wasn't unusual for me to walk several miles a day, often in the early morning or late evening. I enjoyed the quiet, the rhythm of my steps, the way the city softened when the streets were packed with people. One night, I was walking home from a friend's apartment. It was just after midnight, and the air was cool. The streets were completely empty, but they weren't busy either. I took my usual route, cutting through a block of historic buildings with wide, stone steps leading up to their doors. That's when I noticed him. A man was walking a short distance behind me, matching my pace. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people walked this way, but then I realized something strange. He was counting his steps, not muttering under his breath, not softly, but out loud, clear enough for me to hear. 1, 2, 3, 4. I picked up my pace. He did too. 35, 36, 37. I glanced over my shoulder. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the ground, focused, like he was measuring something only he could see. I turned a corner. So did he. 52, 53, 54. My heart started pounding. I had no idea what his goal was. What would happen when he reached whatever number he was aiming for? I crossed the street without waiting for the signal, practically jogging now. He did the same. 81, 82, 83. I made a sharp left, heading toward a busier street, even though it was a longer way home. If I could just get near people, near noise, near anything normal. And then he stopped. I could hear it, the abrupt silence behind me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see him standing there, completely still in the dim dim glow of a street lamp. He was looking directly at me now. 100, that was all he said. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, back the way we had come. I didn't move for a solid minute, just stood there, my breath sharp in my chest. When I finally made myself continue walking, I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see him again. But he was gone. I took a different route home every night after that. I never saw him again. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I went home, locked my door, and never thought about him again. But the truth is, something about that encounter lingered. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I walked alone, I felt like I was just a few steps ahead of someone. I'd turn corners sharply, cross streets randomly, anything to make sure I wasn't being followed. Most of the time, there was no one there. Most of the time, one night, about a month later, I was heading home from work. It was earlier this time, around 9 p.m., but the city had already settled into its nighttime rhythm. I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined how eerie that man had been. Maybe he was just some harmless eccentric. Maybe the numbers had meant nothing. I was almost home when I passed a storefront with large glass windows. The place had closed for the night, the inside dark, but the glass was reflective enough to catch movement behind me. Someone was following me, not close, but far enough back that they blended into the shadows. My pulse jumped, but I told myself to stay calm. It could be anyone, a stranger walking the same way, a neighbor heading home. And then I heard it, a single whispered word, 89. I froze. For a moment, I was too afraid to turn around to confirm what I already knew in my gut. But I had to know. I turned my head, just slightly, just enough to see. The sidewalk behind me was empty. I spun around fully, scanning the street, the alleys, the doorways. Nothing, but I had heard it. I knew I had heard it. I hurried home, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of my apartment made my skin crawl. Every passing car made me flinch. I sat in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, heart racing, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Days passed, then weeks, then months. I forced myself to forget, to move on. I never heard the numbers again until last year. I had moved to a different city by then, a new place with different streets, different routines. One night, I was coming home late, walking down my quiet block when I saw something on my doorstep. A single slip of paper, neatly folded. I picked it up with numb fingers, my stomach twisting before I even opened it. Inside, written in perfect, measured handwriting, was a single number, 100. I moved out the next day. I didn't tell anyone the real reason I moved. Not my friends, not my family. How could I? It sounded insane, paranoid, like some urban legend people tell to freak each other out. But I knew it was real. I moved to a smaller town, somewhere quieter, somewhere I thought no one could follow me. I picked an apartment in a building with security cameras, a lobby with a keycard entry, a unit on the 3rd floor with only one way in or out. I stopped walking home late at night. I drove everywhere. I made sure no one could ever count my steps again. For a while, it worked. Years passed. I started to believe it was over. Maybe it had been a cruel joke. Maybe someone had been playing with me. I still had the note, the one with 100 written on it. I kept it in a locked drawer, like a reminder, but nothing happened until 2 months ago. I was at work, sitting at my desk, when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, a picture of my apartment door. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. It was taken from the hallway, just a few feet away. Someone had been there. It stood right outside my door. I didn't go home that night. I called a friend, made up an excuse, crashed at their place. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another message, but none came. The next morning, I drove straight home. My apartment door looked normal. No sign that anyone had been there. No note. No scratches. Nothing. I should have felt relieved. I didn't. Something felt off. I checked my locks, my windows, my closet, under the bed. Every irrational fear I'd ever had suddenly felt justified. Everything seemed normal until I noticed my bookshelf. One book was missing. I knew exactly which one. I tore through the shelf, running my fingers along the spines, checking twice, 3 times. It was gone. It had been a random thrift store find, a book about old cities and their histories. The kind of thing I picked up on impulse. I hadn't even read it all the way through, but I remembered something. One of the chapters had been about the practice of counting steps in ancient architecture, how certain places were designed with intentional step patterns, ritualistic, symbolic. The idea that certain numbers held power. One of the numbers mentioned 100. I packed a bag and left that same day. I'm in a motel now, trying to decide what to do next. I don't know if this is a warning, a message, a game. I don't know if it's him. My university had a mix of old and new buildings, some dating back to the early 1900 seconds. One of my classes was in a particularly old humanities building, a place with creaky wooden floors, high ceilings, and drafty hallways. The building always had an eerie feel, but nothing ever happened until one evening during finals week. I had stayed late in one of the study rooms on the second floor, cramming for an exam. It was nearly midnight when I packed up my things and stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. The building was mostly empty by then. My footsteps echoed, the kind of sound that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you know you are. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed a long hallway that led to a single window at the very end. It was an old, warped window with distorted glass, the kind that made everything outside look strangely stretched. I had never thought much about it before, but tonight, something was different. A figure stood just outside the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the glass, the way old windows can warp reflections. But then I realized the figure was standing outside on what should have been nothing. There was no ledge, no balcony, just a sheer drop to the ground below. I froze. The figure was tall, too tall, its head almost grazing the top of the window frame. The glass distorted its face, but I could see its mouth was open just slightly. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. Then, with unnatural slowness, the figure tilted its head to the side, not like a person does, but like something trying to mimic human movement and getting it just a little wrong. I took a step back. The floor creaked beneath me. The figure's mouth widened. That was enough for me. I turned and ran, bolting down the stairs two at a time. When I reached the exit and pushed through the heavy doors, I had to look. I stepped into the courtyard and craned my neck up toward the window. There was nothing there, just the glass, warped and reflecting the empty night. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to know, but I never took a class in that building again, and I never ever looked down that hallway. I wish I could say that was the last time I saw it. For weeks after that night, I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the glass was playing tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't a trick. I avoided that building entirely, choosing different routes across campus even when it made no sense to do so. But one night, about a month later, I had no choice. A friend of mine, Daniel, had left his laptop in one of the study rooms in that same building, and I, being the only one still awake at that hour, agreed to grab it for him. I told myself it would be quick, in and out. It was just after 11 p.m. when I stepped inside. The building was silent, the kind of stillness that made every small sound feel louder. My footsteps echoed as I made my way up to the second floor. The study room was exactly where I left it that night, across from the long hallway with the window at the end. I didn't look. I wouldn't look. I grabbed Daniel's laptop and turned back toward the stairs, keeping my gaze locked forward. My hands felt clammy. The air around me had grown noticeably colder, like the whole building had dropped in temperature. And then a creak, a sound from behind me. I stopped mid-step. My stomach turned to ice. It came from the hallway. Slowly, against every ounce of my better judgment, I turned my head. The window at the end of the hall was open. The old, warped glass was pushed outward, and a faint breeze stirred the heavy curtains. That was impossible. That window had never been openable. And then I noticed something else. Handprints, too dark, smeared handprints streaked the glass, as if someone or something had pushed it open from the outside. The realization sent adrenaline spiking through me. I took one step back toward the stairs, and then I heard it. A soft, raspy whisper, not words, just a sound, like a breath being dragged through something hollow. It came from inside the hallway. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. I stood there in the cold night air, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. The building loomed behind me, dark and quiet. I looked up. The window at the end of the hall was closed again. No breeze, no handprints, just the same warped glass, reflecting the night. I never went back inside that building. A few months later, I transferred to a different university for unrelated reasons. But before I left, I overheard something that still makes my skin crawl. A janitor was talking to a professor about the humanities building, saying it needed renovations. The professor laughed and said something about the window on the second floor. Damn thing's always been weird, he said. They tried sealing it shut years ago, but it never stays that way. Students keep saying they see someone out there. The janitor shook his head. Yeah, well, that'd be quite the trick. The professor chuckled. Why's that? The janitor glanced around, then lowered his voice, but I heard him anyway, because that side of the building, there used to be a fire escape there way back when it collapsed in the 50 seconds, a student fell with it. They never found her body. I didn't say anything. I just left. I left that university, moved across the country, and did my best to forget about what happened. For years, I convinced myself it was just one of those weird, creepy experiences that I'd never fully understand. But sometimes, things don't just stay in the past. It came back. Or maybe, it never really left. It was 2 years after I transferred when it happened again. I had just moved into a new apartment, a small but comfortable place in a city where I didn't know anyone. I worked a quiet job, kept to myself, and thought the thing at the window was far behind me. But one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I felt it, that cold, creeping awareness. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my own reflection, when I felt the hair on my arms rise. The apartment was silent, no wind outside, but suddenly it felt like something had shifted, like I wasn't alone. I turned around slowly, scanning the dimly lit hallway behind me. Nothing. I shook it off and went to bed, telling myself it was just nerves, just old memories bubbling up. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up, not because of a noise, not because of a dream, just woke up. The room was dark, the air felt heavy, thick, like the pressure had changed. My curtains were drawn, but for some reason, I felt a horrible, crushing certainty that if I looked toward the window, I would see something standing outside. The problem is, I lived on the 6th floor. I didn't look. I turned on my bedside lamp, pulled the covers over my head like a child, and lay there until the sun came up. After that night, small things started happening. My windows, always locked, would sometimes be slightly open in the morning. I would wake up feeling like someone had been in the room, standing just at the edge of the bed. Then, I started noticing the handprints. At first, I thought I was imagining them, just faint, smudged marks near the base of my bedroom window. But one night, after coming home late, I saw it clearly, 2 dark handprints pressed against the glass. From the outside, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone in another apartment had access to the fire escape. Maybe it was a prank. But my building didn't have fire escapes. And the prints, they were too high for anyone to reach. I cleaned at them. The next morning, they were back. The last time I saw it, I nearly lost my mind. I had been sleeping with the lights on for weeks, barely getting any rest. I started keeping a knife by my bed, even though I knew deep down it wouldn't help. Then, one night, I woke up again, not at 3:12 a.m. this time, but 3:33. The pressure in the room was worse than ever. The air was thick, suffocating, like I was being smothered. In this time, I couldn't stop myself from looking. I turned my head toward the window, and it was there. Not just outside, inside. Something was standing at the foot of my bed, too tall, head nearly touching the ceiling, arms too long, and the mouth, that horrible, gaping mouth, opened. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as the thing tilted its head, that same wrong movement before it whispered something so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. But I did, and I will never forget it. He left the window open. Then, the room crashed back into reality. The pressure lifted, the air moved again. The thing gone. I scrambled out of bed, turned on every single light, and refused to close my eyes again until the sun rose. I moved out the next week, broke my lease, left behind half my belongings. I didn't care. I checked every window in my new apartment 100 times. I never slept without a light on, and for a while, nothing happened. But a few nights ago, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a picture, blurry, warped, like something taken through old, distorted glass. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at, but then my stomach turned to ice. It was a window, a familiar window, the one at the end of the hall, and outside of it, something was standing there, head tilted, mouth open. I am leaving town. I don't know where I'll go next, but I don't think it will matter, because I know now it never needed the building, it never needed the window, it just needed me. My flight had been delayed multiple times due to storms, and eventually it was cancelled entirely. The airline rebooked me for a morning flight and offered a hotel voucher, but by the time I got through the chaotic customer service line, the hotel shuttle had stopped running. I decided to stay in the airport instead. It wasn't my first time spending the night in an airport, and I figured I'd just find a quiet spot and get a few hours of restless sleep before my early flight. That was a mistake. By 2 a.m., the terminal had mostly emptied out, except for a few scattered travelers curled up on benches or charging their phones. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the occasional crackle of a distant announcement was the only real noise. It was eerie, but not unusual. I found a semi-secluded waiting area near one of the smaller gates, away from the main concourse. There were rows of empty seats, the kind with armrests that made it impossible to lie down properly. Across from me, there was a woman sitting completely still. At first, I didn't pay much attention to her. She was wearing a pale gray dress and long, dark hair that hung over her shoulders. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She was positioned in the middle of the row, not at the ends where most people would sit. I assumed she was another stranded traveler, maybe waiting for a morning flight like I was. But then I noticed something strange. She wasn't doing anything. No phone, no book, no luggage, nothing. She was just sitting there, perfectly straight, staring at the blank screen where flight information would usually be displayed. Her posture was rigid, almost unnatural. I kept sneaking glances at her, feeling increasingly unsettled. Something about the way she was positioned made it seem like she was aware of me, even though she never never looked in my direction. After about 10 minutes, I got up and moved to a different row of seats a little further away. As I settled in, I saw her shift slightly out of the corner of my eye. When I looked back, she had turned her head. She was looking directly at me. I froze. Her face was expressionless, her eyes completely unblinking. I tried to act like I hadn't noticed, turning my gaze back to my phone, but my heart was pounding. Then she stood up. I felt a surge of panic. She didn't have any bags, no carry-on, no purse, nothing, just her dress and her blank stare. She stepped away from the row of chairs and walked slowly toward the hallway leading to the restrooms and vending machines. I exhaled, relieved that she was leaving, but then she stopped. Halfway down the hall, she paused, standing perfectly still again. Then, without turning around, she tilted her head back like she was listening for something. I grabbed my backpack and decided I was done with that corner of the airport. I speed walked back toward the more populated part of the terminal, where a few other stranded passengers were dozing near the food court. I sat there for the next hour, checking over my shoulder constantly. She never came back. Eventually, exhaustion went out, and I dozed off for a little while. When I woke up, the airport was stirring back to life. Business travelers bustled in, early morning flights started boarding, and the eerie stillness of the night before was gone. I convinced myself I had just been overly tired, letting my imagination get the best of me. Maybe she was just a weird traveler. Maybe I had misread the whole situation. Then, as I went to my gate, I passed by the waiting area where she had been sitting. There was a single thing on the seat where she had been, a boarding pass. It was dated 3 days ago, and the decimation. There wasn't one. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the boarding pass. It was crisp, uncreased, like it had just been printed, but the flight number was missing. The destination field was blank. Only a name was printed on it, passenger Amelia L. I didn't pick it up. Something deep in my gut told me not to touch it. Instead, I scanned the waiting area. The woman was nowhere in sight. There were a few early travelers settling into their gates, oblivious to the fact that someone or something had been sitting there just hours ago, staring at me. A slow, creeping chill ran through me. I knew I needed to get away from that spot, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the desk at the gate, where a tired-looking airline employee was setting up for the first morning flight. I cleared my throat. Hey, was there a flight here last night? Around 2 a.m. The employee frowned and shook her head. Nope, this gate closes after the last departure around 10 p.m. No red-eye flights from here. That didn't make sense. I nodded, trying to act casual. Weird. I thought I saw someone waiting here. She let out a short laugh. Probably Amelia. My blood went cold. I forced a weak chuckle. Amelia. The woman sighed and leaned on the counter. Yeah, we get reports about her sometimes. The cleaning crew says they see a woman just sitting in the waiting area at night. Always alone. Always staring at the screen. But there's never a record of anyone being there. No security footage. No ticket scans. Just stories. I felt the world tilting slightly under my feet. She, ever do anything? I asked, my voice drier than I expected. The employee shook her head. Not really. She just waits. But a few people have said she follows them when they leave. Never interacts. Just stands there, watching. My mind flashed back to the way she had stood in the hallway, head tilted back as if listening for me. What happened to her? I finally asked. The woman at the counter shrugged. No idea. Maybe just an old urban legend. Or maybe someone who missed their flight and never left. She yawned and turned back to her computer, completely unaware of how hard my hands were gripping the strap of my bag. I turned away quickly, resisting the urge to look back at the empty seat. I made my way to my gate, boarded my flight, and got the hell out of that airport. But even now, years later, whenever I find myself waiting for a flight in an empty terminal, I catch myself scanning the rows of seats, watching, because deep down, I know she's still there, waited for someone to join her, and I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I got on my flight, left that airport behind, and never thought about Amelia again. But that would be a lie, because Amelia, she found me again. It was about 6 months later, different airport, different city. I was on a late night layover, stuck in a mostly empty terminal, just waiting for my next flight. The airport had that same eerie quietness, the kind that only happens between 1 and 4 a.m., when the world feels like it's barely moving. I had almost convinced myself that my experience with Amelia had been some strange, sleep-deprived hallucination. Almost. But then I saw her. I was sitting by a window, watching the distant runway lights flicker in the fog, when I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection. A woman, sitting alone at a row of seats behind me. My stomach dropped. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head to look. There she was. Same pale gray dress, same long, dark hair, same empty stare, fixed on the flight information screen above the gate. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't possible. I was in a completely different state, a completely different airport, but she was there, exactly as I had seen her before. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe this was just some random woman who happened to look like her. Then, as if she heard that thought, she turned her head. Our eyes met, and then she smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a polite, passing one. It was slow, deliberate, like she had been waiting for me to notice her. My body screamed at me to move, to get up, to run, but I was frozen in my seat, heart hammering so loud I thought she might hear it. Then, just like before, she stood up, and she started walking toward me. I grabbed my bag and bolted. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. I sprinted through the terminal, past empty gates and sleeping passengers, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I made it to the main concourse, where a few overnight staff were cleaning near the food court. I stopped, gasping for breath, and turned. She was gone. There was no sign of her. No pale gray dress, no long, dark hair, just the empty terminal behind me, stretching into silence. I spent the next 2 hours sitting near a security checkpoint, refusing to move until it was time to board. When I finally got on my flight, I felt like I could breathe again, but as I buckled my seatbelt and glanced out the window, I caught one last glimpse of the terminal, and there, standing near the gate, was Amelia. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was just standing there, watching. Waited. I don't fly at night anymore. I take early morning flights, surrounded by crowds and noise, where I know I'm safe. But every time I walk through an airport, I can't help but scan the waiting areas, because I know she's still out there, still waiting, and I know one day, when I least expected, Amelia will find me again. The next time, I don't think I'll be able to run. I used to work at a small independent clothing boutique tucked into the corner of a busy shopping district. It was the kind of place that sold expensive, minimalist clothing to customers who didn't blink at $100 price tags. My shifts were quiet, mostly spent folding the same shirts over and over, occasionally helping customers who wandered in. One evening, about an hour before closing, a man walked in. There was nothing immediately wrong with him. He was just, his clothes were perfectly neat, but they didn't fit him quite right. His jacket was a little too big, his shoes a little too small. His face was almost symmetrical but not quite, like a slightly distorted reflection in water. I greeted him, and he nodded but didn't say anything. He drifted through the store, his eyes never really landing on any item for too long. I was used to customers browsing in silence, so I didn't think much of it at first, but then I realized something strange. He wasn't looking at the clothing. He was looking at me, not in a creepy, leering way. He just sounded interested, like he was studying me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on refolding a stack of sweaters, but the feeling of his eyes on me wouldn't go away. I finally glanced up at the mirrors lining the walls of the store, and my stomach dropped. He wasn't there. The store had mirrors everywhere, long, sleek panels designed to make the space look bigger. I could see myself, the clothing racks, even the street outside reflected back at me, but not him. He was standing just a few feet away from me, but in the mirror there was nothing. I froze. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was standing at the perfect angle where the mirrors weren't catching him. Maybe it was a weird lighting trick, but then he took a step closer. I heard his footfalls, saw the way his presence subtly shifted the air, but the mirror remained empty. I felt my breath hitch. He finally spoke. His voice was low, measured, almost too smooth. "You work alone here." My hands clenched around the sweater I had been folding. "No, I lied. My manager is in the back." I don't know why I said it. It was an automatic instinct, some primal part of me recognizing that this was wrong. His lips curved into a small smile. "Good," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the store without another word. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped outside, and I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I ran to the door, peering out onto the street. He was walking away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers. No one seemed to notice him. I glanced back at the store mirror one last time, hoping, praying that I had imagined it, while the empty space where he had stood remained. I closed up early that night. Nothing like that ever happened again, but sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I get this feeling like someone is watching me, and every time I catch my reflection in a window or a puddle on the ground, I'd have to force myself to look, because I'm terrified that one day I'll see him standing behind me, and I know he won't be in the reflection. I quit the boutique a few months after that night. Not immediately. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just a trick of the light, a stress-induced hallucination. But deep down, I knew better. The feeling of unease never really left after that encounter. Even after I left the job, I couldn't shake the paranoia. I started checking my reflection more often, windows, car mirrors, even my phone screen when it was dark. Always looking for him. For a while, nothing happened. Then, one night, it did. I was walking home late from my new job at a coffee shop, earbuds in, hoodie up, the city lights buzzing around me. The streets were empty, but they weren't crowded either, just enough people that I wasn't alone, but not enough that I felt safe. Then I felt it, that pressure on the back of my neck, that awareness of being watched. I told myself I was imagining it, but I still slowed down and casually glanced at a shop window as I passed, and there he was, standing across the street, staring right at me. My stomach turned to ice. It was the same man from the boutique, same slightly too big jacket, same distorted symmetry to his face. but something was different now. His expression. That night at the boutique, he had looked curious, but now he looked like he knew me, and he was smiling, a slow, patient smile. I ripped my earbuds out and picked up my pace, my heart hammering. I didn't want to run. Something in my gut told me that running would make it worse. I turned the next corner without looking back. My apartment was only a few blocks away. I just had to make it there. I walked faster. My hands were shaking. I forced myself not to check another window. I didn't want to see if he was still there. But then the street lights flickered just for a second, just long enough to make my heart lurch. And when they came back on, he was standing in front of me. I stopped so fast I nearly tripped. My breath caught in my throat. He hadn't walked there. He hadn't moved there. He had just appeared. My body locked up. Every survival instinct screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. He smiled wider, still working low, and my mouth was dry. I couldn't speak. He tilted his head slightly, like he was waiting for an answer. Then, without another word, he stepped back into the shadows between two buildings. I stood there, shaking for what felt like forever. When I finally forced myself to move, I sprinted the rest of the way home. I double-locked my door. I shut every curtain. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I don't know what he is. I don't know why he's interested in me, but I do know one thing. He's still out there, and I think he's waiting for something. I don't want to find out what. After that night, I stopped going out alone after dark. I changed my route home from work. I even switched apartments, moving across the city to a building with better security. It helped for a while. I told myself it was over, that whatever he was, whoever he was, he had lost interest. I was wrong. It started with the mirrors. One morning, I was getting ready for work, brushing my teeth in my tiny new bathroom. My mirror was slightly fogged from the shower, and as I wiped it down, I saw something that made my blood turn cold. A fingerprint, a single, smudged print near the bottom corner of the mirror. It wasn't mine. I live alone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I touched the mirror without realizing. Maybe it was there before, and I just hadn't noticed. But then it happened again and again. Every few mornings, I would find new prints, sometimes just one, sometimes several, as if someone had pressed their fingers lightly against the glass, just barely touching it. I started cleaning the mirror obsessively. I even bought a new one, but no matter what I did, the prints always came back. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my bathroom faucet running. I lay in bed, heart pounding. I hadn't left it all. I was sure of that. I forced myself to get up. My legs felt like lead as I made my way to the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, the light off, the sink was on, and the mirror was covered in handprints, not just fingerprints. Full, open-palmed handprints smeared across the glass like someone had been pressing against it over and over. I backed out of the bathroom so fast I nearly tripped. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and snapped a picture before running out of my apartment. I didn't go back inside until the sun was up. The picture was blurry, but the handprints were there. That was when I knew he hadn't lost interest. He was getting closer. After that, I did something I had sworn I would never do. I told someone. I don't have a lot of close friends, but I reached out to my coworker, Natalie. She was the kind of person who always seemed to know things, old folklore, weird urban legends. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. She listened carefully as I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that made my stomach drop. "You need to stop looking for him." I frowned. "What do you mean?" The words said to shiver down my spine. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, old-looking key. "Put this in your window." "What?" It's just something my grandmother used to say," she explained. "A key in the window locks things out. It won't stop him completely, but it might slow him down." It sounded ridiculous, but at this point, I was willing to try anything. That night, I placed the key in my bedroom window. I didn't check my mirrors. I kept my head down. For the first time in weeks, nothing happened. The mirror was clean the next morning. No fingerprints, no handprints, no running water. It's been a few months now. I still don't look in mirrors for too long. I still keep the key in my window, and so far, he hasn't come back. But some nights, when I'm walking home, I still feel it. That pressure, that awareness, like something is waiting. And every now and then, I swear, just out of the corner of my eye, I see a reflection that doesn't belong. I was driving across the country for a new job. It was late, and I had been on the road for hours when I decided to pull off the highway for some food. I found a small 24-hour diner just outside a quiet town, the kind with flickering neon signs and vinyl booths that look like they haven't been updated since the 70s. The place was nearly empty, except for an older man in a trucker hat nursing a coffee at the counter and a waitress who looked half asleep. I slid into a booth near the window and ordered a burger and coffee to keep me awake. While waiting for my food, I noticed a strange detail. The last booth in the diner, way at the back, was completely blocked off by a velvet rope. like the kind you'd see at a movie theater. The lights above it were dimmed, casting it in shadow. There was a small sign hanging from the rope that just said, "Closed for maintenance." I didn't think much of it at first, but then I realized something that sent a small chill up my spine. Despite being closed, the salt and pepper shakers were arranged neatly on the table. The napkin dispenser was full. A glass of water, untouched, sat at the edge. It was set up as if someone was supposed to be sitting there. I turned to the waitress when she brought my food. "Hey, is that booth actually broken or something?" I asked, gesturing to the back. She froze for half a second. It was subtle, but I noticed. Then she smiled in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes and said, "Oh yeah, it's just old." That answer didn't satisfy me. The diner itself was old, but nothing else was blocked off. No other seats were under maintenance, but I let it go and started eating. A few minutes later, the man at the counter stood up, paid his bill, and walked out, leaving just me and the waitress. The diner was silent except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. That's when I heard it, a soft creak, like someone shifting in their seat. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. The glass of water at the last booth had moved. It had been near the edge before, but now it was closer to the middle of the table. I hadn't seen it move. I hadn't heard anything other than that small creak. I glanced at the waitress, but she kept her eyes down, scribbling in her notepad even though there were no new orders. Then another sound, a slow, deliberate tap, like someone was drumming their fingers against the table. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there. I forced myself to look at the booth again. The water glass was now on the other side of the table, closer to my side of the diner. I didn't hear it slide, and I didn't see it move, but it had. I grabbed my wallet and threw a 20 on the table. The waitress finally looked at me then, her face completely unreadable. "Drive safe," she said, like she knew I wasn't sticking around. I nearly ran to my car. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced back through the diner's window. The last booth was still in shadow, but the glass of water, it was now sitting on the very edge of the table, like someone was reaching for it. I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed to see, and I don't want to know. As I sped down the empty highway, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. The diner disappeared into the night, its neon sign shrinking into a faint red blur in the distance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something unfinished, like I had narrowly avoided being part of something much worse. I drove for another hour before deciding I needed to pull over at a rest stop to clear my head. I parked near the entrance and locked my doors just in case. The rest stop was quiet, just a vending machine buzzing under the fluorescent lights and a single car parked a few spots away. I reached for my phone to check the map, but my hands were shaking. I told myself it was just nerves. I had been driving too long. My mind played tricks on me. The glass of water could have been the waitress moving it when I wasn't looking, or maybe my exhaustion had made me imagine things. But then, tap, I froze. It was the same sound. That slow, deliberate tap I had heard in the diner. I turned my head so fast my neck cracked. Nothing. The rest stop was empty. The other car was still parked, unmoving. Tap. It was coming from my passenger side window. I hadn't seen anyone approach. My doors were locked, but there was no mistaking it. Someone or something was on the other side of that glass. I forced myself to look. At first, I thought there was nothing there, just my own reflection in the dim light, but then I saw it. A faint smudge, just below eye level, like a fingertip pressed against the glass. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. The smudge dragged downward, slow and steady, like someone was running their hand down the window, but there was no one there. I fumbled with the keys, starting the car so fast my tires screeched as I pulled out of the lot. My heart was pounding, my skin crawling. I didn't stop driving until I reached a motel on the outskirts of the next town. I didn't care how run down it was. I just needed to be inside, away from my car, away from that highway. I locked the door, shoved the dresser in front of it for good measure, and sat on the bed, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't sleep at night. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Almost. But when I went back out to my car, my stomach dropped. There, on the passenger side window, was a perfect outline of a handprint, and on the hood of my car, written in the thin layer of dust, saying so. I took a different route to my destination, avoiding that stretch of highway entirely. I don't know what I almost met that night in the diner. I don't know how it followed me, and I don't ever want to find out. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city. The moment I saw the skyline rising up ahead, I felt some of the tension in my chest loosen. I checked into a different motel, one that was well lit and had plenty of people around. I parked my car right under a street lamp, locked the doors twice, and tried to convince myself that I was safe. But the unease never left me. I kept life replayed everything in my head. The closed-off booth, the movie glass of water, the tapping, the handprint, and the message, "Say it soon." I wasn't sure if it was a threat or a promise. That night, I forced myself to sleep, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking up to every small noise, convinced something was in the room with me. At one point, I could have sworn I heard tapping again, but it was faint, like it was coming from somewhere just outside my window. I was on the second floor. By morning, I was exhausted, but I had to keep moving. I grabbed coffee at the motel lobby, avoiding eye contact with anyone, and got back on the road. The rest of the drive was quiet. There were no strange sounds, no smudges on my window, no eerie messages. By the time I reached my new apartment, I was starting to feel ridiculous. Maybe it had all been paranoia. Maybe I'd scared myself over nothing. I kept telling myself that as I unpacked, set up my furniture, and settled in. For a while, nothing happened. Weeks passed, then months. I started my new job, made friends, and eventually stopped thinking about that night. Until one evening, almost a year later, I had been working late, and by the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. My apartment building was quiet, most of the residents already asleep. I walked into my unit, set my keys down on the counter, and went to grab a glass of water. When I opened the cabinet, I froze. One of the glasses was already full. I hadn't poured it. I hadn't touched any of them since morning, and it was sitting there, right at the edge of the shelf. My stomach turned to ice. I stepped back, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd forgotten I left it there. But then I heard it. A single, deliberate tap, not from the kitchen, not from my bedroom, from inside the hallway closet. I stared at the door. It was closed, locked. I hadn't opened it in days. I backed away slowly, heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the apartment without looking back. I didn't sleep at home that night. I didn't sleep at home the next night either. A few days later, I broke my lease and moved across town. I never went back to that apartment. I don't know what was in that closet or how it had followed me for so long, but I do know one thing. It never needed to rush, because no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it's always waiting. I work at a university, but not as a professor or researcher. I'm in inventory management. My job mostly involves keeping track of the expensive equipment various departments order, storing surplus items, and occasionally dealing with asset disposal. It's a lot of paperwork and movie boxes around, but it's quiet, and I like that. One of the less glamorous parts of the job is dealing with old lab equipment, some of which is radioactive or otherwise hazardous. We have a designated storage building for these materials, which the university uses as a temporary holding site until a disposal company collects them. It's an old, squat structure, more warehouse than lab, and it's been largely unused for years except for this purpose. One evening, I was finishing up late. The disposal team was scheduled to arrive the next morning, so I had to double check that everything was accounted for. I made my way across campus, my breath fogging in the cold air, and unlocked the heavy metal doors to the storage building. Inside, the place was dimly lit, with rows of old shelving units stretching toward the back. Some were filled with outdated computers, old lab machines, and rusting filing cabinets. Others held sealed containment boxes, the kind you weren't supposed to open. The air smelled of dust, chemicals, and something faintly metallic. I was checking the manifest when I heard it, a shuffling sound somewhere toward the back of the room. At first, I figured it was just the building settling. It was old, and sometimes the metal walls creaked with temperature changes. But then I heard it again, slow, deliberate footsteps. I called out, "Hello," thinking maybe campus security was making rounds. No response. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight and aimed it down the narrow aisle between the shelves. The beam caught something that shouldn't have been there. A man stood halfway down the aisle, partially obscured by a metal shelf. He was wearing a white lab coat, but it was old, yellowed, and too big for him, like it belonged to someone else. His face was thin, wrong, with deep-set eyes and skin stretched too tightly over his bones. He wasn't moving. He was just watching me. A shock of fear went through me, and I stepped back instinctively. "This is a restricted area," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "You copy in her." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words. Then he smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent ice through my veins. I turned and bolted toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of feet moving fast, the shuffle turning into an urgent, erratic sprint. I reached the doors, fumbling with the lock, when I heard him stop just behind me. I didn't dare turn around. A voice, dry and rasping, far too close, whispered, "I had one just like you." The lock clicked. I threw myself outside, slammed the door shut, and locked them behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped dropped my keys. Campus security arrived a few minutes later. They searched the building thoroughly. There was no sign of the man and nothing was missing, but in the far back of the storage building, they found something, an old lab ID badge, buried under dust and debris. The photo was faded, but the name was still legible. I looked at it, my stomach twisting into knots. The ID belonged to a lab technician who had gone missing in 1978. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I left the building that night, and the strange man in the borrowed coat was never a problem again. But that's not how this works, is it? The university wrote it off as a break-in. They figured some homeless guy had managed to slip in, maybe even living there for a while. But that didn't explain the ID badge. It didn't explain the way he moved, or how he vanished. And it didn't explain what happened after. A week passed. I avoided the storage building like the plague. I was rattled, but I still had a job to do, and campus security swore they'd reinforce the locks. Still, I started noticing things. Small things at first. My office door would be unlocked in the morning, even though I was always the last to leave. The inventory sheets for the hazardous materials section were being moved, just slightly out of place, as if someone had been flipping through them. The security cameras covering the storage building would randomly glitch at night, the footage going static for just a few seconds. But the worst part, every time I walked across campus at night, I started feeling like I was being watched. It didn't matter if I was alone or in a crowd. The sensation was always there, a weight behind my back, a shadow just beyond my vision. Then, on a particularly cold evening, I passed by one of the large glass windows of the science building. I saw my reflection, and standing just behind me, barely a few feet away, was a thin figure in a white lab coat. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. There was no one there, but the feeling of being watched, it lingered. It was so strong I could barely breathe. I ran home that night. I told myself I was just shaken up, that my brain was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The last time I encountered him was 3 nights later. I had just wrapped up a late shift. My car was parked near the science building, where most of the research labs were. The campus was empty, eerily quiet. As I walked toward my car, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The driver's side door was open. I stopped. My keys were in my pocket. I knew I had locked it. The overhead light inside the car flickered, revealing something in the passenger seat. A white lab coat. It was folded neatly on the seat, like it was waiting for me. I took a step back, my breath turning to ice. The moment I did, the overhead light flickered again, and for just a second, just a split second, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the parking lot. Thin, too tall, too still, watching me. That was enough. I turned and ran back toward the main campus buildings, toward the security office. I didn't look back. By the time I convinced a guard to walk me back, the lab coat was gone. The car was locked again. Nothing was missing, but I knew what I saw. I put in a request the next morning to transfer locations. I didn't want to work near that storage building anymore. I didn't even want to be on that side of campus. Luckily, they moved me to a different office, one in a newer building, far from the old labs. Nothing happened after that. No more strange figures. No more missing files. No more open car doors. But I still think about that moment in the parking lot. The way he just stood there, waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'll pass by a window at night and catch a glimpse of something white, a shape, watching from the distance, waiting for me to come back. I'd like to say moving to a different building solved everything, that I left whatever was happening behind, and my life went back to normal. It didn't. The sighting stopped, sure, but the feeling didn't. The awareness of something just beyond my vision, the strange sensation that my name had been spoken when no one was around, the creepy paranoia of being watched, it all stayed with me. Then, 6 months later, the incident happened. The university decided to renovate the old storage building. They wanted to clear it out and turn it into a new lab space. I wasn't involved anymore, but I overheard a few professors talking about it. Apparently, some of the disposal files were missing, not just misplaced, gone. Even the digital records had been wiped. They figured it was just an error in the system, but I knew better. One afternoon, I got a text from a coworker. Hey, did you hear? Carter went missing. Carter was one of the maintenance guys. He was assigned to help with clearing out the storage building. The last time anyone saw him, he had been sent to take inventory of the old hazardous materials. He never came back. Security footage showed him entering the storage building. There was no footage of him leaving. The doors never opened again. Campus police did a full search of the building, top to bottom. They found his clipboard, his flashlight, still on, lying near one of the containment units. But no Carter, no footprints leading away, no signs of forced entry. It was like he had just ceased to exist. They eventually ruled it as an off-campus disappearance, assumed he left voluntarily despite having no reason to. His family didn't believe it, neither did I. The night after Carter went missing, I had the dream. I was standing in the storage building. It was dark. The shelves stretched endlessly, much longer than they should have. My breath came out in short, sharp puffs, and the air was thick with the scent of old chemicals and metal. I wasn't alone. Somewhere in the rows of shelves, shelves, something was moving. Slow, deliberate footsteps, just like before. Then a voice, low and familiar, rasped from the darkness. "You should have stayed." I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. When I sat up, I saw something on my nightstand that hadn't been there before. A white lab coat, neatly folded, the same one I saw in my car that night. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe. I grabbed my keys, left my apartment, and checked into a hotel for the night. When I returned the next morning, the lab coat was gone. I never saw it again. The university sealed off the storage building after Carter disappeared. No renovations, no conversions, just shut down permanently. Every once in a while, I still dream of the place. The endless shelves, the soft shuffle of footsteps, the faint, chemical scent of something old and forgotten. But the worst part, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I hear a sound from the hallway outside my bedroom. A slow, deliberate shuffling, like someone standing there, just out of sight, just waiting. I was a history major, which meant a lot of time in university archives, digging through old documents and records. My campus had a large, well-funded archive building, but it also had something else, an auxiliary storage space on the far side of campus, and an older building that used to be the original library. It wasn't exactly abandoned, just rarely used. The main archive was climate-controlled and pristine, while this place was more of a dumping ground for materials deemed low priority. I ended up there a lot because my research focused on obscure local history. It was a quiet, dimly lit place with heavy wooden doors and deep rows of shelves. The first time I noticed him, I assumed he was a fellow student. I was hunched over a stack of records at one of the log tables when I heard someone shifting through a shelf behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of the other researchers. Instead, there was a man, not old, but not young either. He wore a gray cardigan over a button-up shirt and had the kind of face that seemed blurred around the edges, like an old photograph. He didn't acknowledge me, just kept running his fingers along the spines of the books. His movements were strange, slow, deliberate. I was about to say something, but he turned and walked away down the road before I could. I saw him again the next time I visited, and again, always in the background, always moving slowly through the shelves, touching books, documents, papers. He never spoke. At first, I chalked it up to an eccentric professor or maybe a local historian with special access. The archive wasn't exactly bustly with people, so it made sense that I'd see the same person multiple times. But something about him unsettled me. I realized, after a while, that I had never seen him enter or leave. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow him. I waited until he passed by my table and slipped into an aisle. I kept my distance, careful not to make a sound. He moved through the rows with that same deliberate slowness, fingers grazing old books and folders as if reading them by touch alone. Then, without warning, he turned sharply and walked through a door at the back of the archive. I froze. That door led to a locked storage area. I knew because I had tried it before. Some of the oldest, most fragile documents were kept back there, and only senior staff had the key. I waited a few seconds, then walked over. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. I turned the handle, not expecting it to give, but it did. The room beyond was dark. No light, no sound. The air was thick with dust, the kind that made your lungs feel heavy. I fumbled for a light switch, my pulse hammering. The overhead fluorescence flickered on, and the room was empty. No other exits, no windows, just rows of shelves, stacked with boxes so old they looked like they might crumble if touched, but no man. I backed out of the room, forcing myself to breathe. I locked the door behind me. I never saw him again after that. I stopped going to the auxiliary archive, finishing my research at the main one instead. I asked a staff member once, casually, if they knew of an older man who worked in the archives, maybe a historian or retired professor. They just frowned and shook their head. That storage room, it hadn't been opened in years. I wish I could say I let it go after that I never thought about it again, but you don't just forget something like that. I tried to rationalize it. I really did. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my mind had twisted something mundane into something eerie. Maybe there was another exit I hadn't seen. I almost convinced myself. Until, months later, something changed. I was in the main archive, flipping through old campus records for an unrelated project. That's when I found his name. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. It was just a list of past employees, archivists, librarians, historians. I skimmed past the names until one jumped out at me. A man with a name I won't repeat here. Hired 1946, retired 1972, deceased 1973. I sat there staring at the page, my hands shaking. It was him, the same dull cardigan, the same blurred, almost indistinct features, the same way he moved through the shelves, tracing the books with his fingers. But there was something else, something that made my stomach drop. His position had been archivist of special collections, and the location of his office, that same auxiliary archive, the one with the locked storage room, the one he had disappeared into. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't want to know. All I know is that I never went back, and I hope hope, wherever he is, he never follows me. For a long time, I avoided thinking about it. I finished school, moved to a new city, started a new job. Life went on, but some things don't stay buried. It was about a year later when I got an email from an old classmate, someone I'd worked with on research projects. She was still at the university, finishing her grad degree, and had started working part-time in the archives. Her message was casual at first, just catching up, but then at the end she wrote, "Hey, weird question, do you remember that old auxiliary archive? The one across campus? Have you ever seen anything off there?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I typed back, trying to sound neutral, "What do you mean?" Her reply came fast, "I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm not alone when I'm shelving stuff. And the other day, I could have sworn I saw someone moving between the shelves, but when I checked, no one was there. It's probably just my imagination, but it freaked me out." I sat frozen for a long time before I finally responded, "Get out of there." She didn't reply right away. When she finally did, it was just, why, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I couldn't let it go. So I told her everything. I expected her to laugh it off, or maybe tell me I was paranoid. But instead, after a long pause, she sent another message. "The back storage room." I felt sick. "What about it?" I typed. Her response sent a shiver down my spine. "It's been locked since before I started working here. But the other day, I swear I heard something inside, like paper shuffling, or someone moving things around." I didn't respond. I couldn't. A few days later, she quit her job at the archive. She never told me if anything else happened, and I never asked. We drifted apart after that. Some things, I think, are better left unspoken. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that man. Still wonder if he's there. Still wonder if he's waiting. I work at a small, family-run diner on the outskirts of town. It's the kind of place that sees a steady flow of regulars, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist looking for a quick bite. It's nothing fancy, just a few booths, a long counter, and a kitchen that always smells like bacon grease and coffee. We close at midnight, and on most nights, I handle the last shift alone, save for the cook in the back. It's usually quiet by then. The late-night regulars keep to themselves, nursing their coffees, scrolling their phones, or chatting in low voices. But one man always stood out. He came in every night at exactly 11:30, never earlier, never later. He wasn't a regular in the usual sense. He never spoke to anyone, never made eye contact, and never deviated from his routine. He would walk in, sit in the farthest booth, order the same thing, a plain hamburger, no toppings, no fries, and a glass of water. Then he would that was the unsettling part. He didn't eat like a normal person. He took small, calculated bites, chewing so slowly it was almost mechanical. He never used his hands, only the dull diner knife and fork, slicing the burger into precise pieces. He ate every meal like it was his last, like he was memorizing the sensation of every bite. In the way he watched people, no, not watched, exactly. It was more like he was waiting. The first few weeks, I chalked it up to harmless eccentricity. Maybe he had a disorder, or maybe he was just a lonely man with a rigid routine. But then, small things started to get off. One night, after he left, I went to clear his table and found the knife still resting on his plate, upright, as if he just placed it down mid-motion. The burger had been cut into perfect squares, but only half had been eaten. The rest sat there, untouched. Another night, I noticed he never blinked. That once, he would sit there, eating in that slow, deliberate manner, staring straight ahead, unblinking, for the entire 30 minutes he was there. Then, last night happened. It was quiet, just me and the cook in the back, when he walked in at his usual time. But something felt different. His steps were heavier, his movements less fluid, and when he sat down, he didn't immediately look at the menu like he always did. Instead, he turned his head, slowly, unnaturally, until he was looking directly at me. Not at the menu, not at his usual seat, at me. My stomach turned to ice. I forced a polite smile and grabbed my notepad, but my hands were trembling. "Here you shall," I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I wanted. He didn't respond right away. He just kept looking at me. Then, in a voice that didn't sound quite right, too smooth, too careful, he said, "I've been practicing." I don't know why, but that sentence hit me like a gut punch. "Practicing what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. For the first time, he smiled, a slow, creeping smile that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned forward, just slightly, and whispered, "Eating like you." I stepped back instinctively, knocking into the counter behind me. My breath hitched. Before I could say anything, he did something he had never done before. He stood up. He had never left before finishing his meal. But last night, he stood up, walked out of the diner, and disappeared into the dark. He didn't pay. He didn't say goodbye. Just left. I told my manager everything this morning. She checked the security footage, and that's when I realized the most disturbing disturbing thing. We have recordings of every night he had been here. Every night, the same booth, the same meal, the same brutality. But not last night. Last night, the camera showed me walking to his table, talking to an empty sit, taking an order that no one had given, bringing food to a booth that no one had ever sat in. But I knew what I saw. I know he was there. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was a trick of the cameras, a glitch, a coincidence. Maybe the footage was corrupted. Maybe the camera was angled wrong. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me after weeks of watching this strange man eat alone. But deep down, I knew he had been there. I could still hear his voice in my head. I've been practicing. Practicing what? Acting normal, bloodied and, or something worse. I decided not to go to work the next night. I told my manager I was sick and spent the evening locked in my apartment, pacing. Every noise outside made me jump. Every shadow seemed too long. I kept checking the locks, making sure the windows were shut. I'd even considered calling the police, but what would I say? A man who doesn't exist has been watching me eat burgers for weeks. At around 11:30, the time he would normally come in, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I stared at it for a long time before answering. I didn't say anything, either did they, but I could hear something, a slow, wet chewing sound. My stomach flipped. I hung up and threw my phone on the couch like it was contaminated. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. If I called back, would he answer? And then a knock at my door, a single, sharp knock. I froze. I live on the 3rd floor. There's only one entrance. No one buzzed up. No footsteps in the hallway, but someone was standing on the other side of my door. I crept toward the peephole, every part of me screaming to stay back. And then I heard it. A slow, deliberate whisper. I think I've got it now. I didn't look. I couldn't. Instead, I turned off every light, crawled into my bathroom, and locked the door. I stayed there for hours, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for the sound of footsteps, the creak of the door, a shadow under the crack. Nothing. Eventually, the sun rose, and I dared to peek outside. There was no one there, but on my welcome mat, sitting neatly in the center, was a hamburger, plain, no toppings, cut into perfect squares. I quit my job that morning. I moved in with a friend across town. I changed my number. I don't go out alone after dark. I haven't stepped foot near the diner since, and I haven't seen him again. But sometimes, late at night, when I least expect it, I hear the sound of slow, deliberate chewing. For a while, I convinced myself that it was over. I left the diner, changed my number, moved to a different neighborhood, and tried to push it all out of my mind. I told myself he was just a weirdo, someone with a strange obsession, and that if I stayed away, he would forget about me. I was wrong. It started again about a month later. I was staying with my friend Jenna, crashing on her couch while I figured out my next move. One night, she decided to order takeout, and I offered to grab it from the front door. It was late, maybe 10:30, and the street was quiet. I stepped outside, grabbed the bag, and turned to head back in, and then I saw it. Sitting on the porch railing, neatly placed in the center, was a single white plate. A plate hamburger, cut into perfect squares. My blood ran cold. I didn't say anything to Jenna. I didn't want to scare her. I just picked up the plate, walked to the trash bin, and threw it away. My hands were shaking the whole time. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, Jenna mentioned something that made my stomach turn. "Did you hear someone outside last night?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. I thought I heard footsteps on the porch around, I don't know, 3 a.m. I forced a smile, shook my head, and said I hadn't heard anything. That was the first lie. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, the plate was inside. I woke up groggy, rubbing my eyes, and shuffled into the kitchen for coffee. And there it was, on the kitchen table, a plate hamburger, cut into perfect squares. I nearly dropped my mug. My hands went cold. I turned to Jenna, heart pounding. Did you leave this here?" My voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper. She frowned, confused. "What? No, I just woke up. What are you talking about?" I pointed at the plate, my entire body trembling. Her expression changed. Confusion melted into fear. Neither of us had put it there, and yet it sat there, neat, deliberate, waiting. Jenna grabbed her phone and called the cops. They came, took our statements, and looked around, but there were no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows were shut, no fingerprints, nothing missing. They told us it was probably a prank, that someone had broken in just to leave food on the table. They offered to send extra patrols in the area. I nodded. I thanked them. I pretended to feel better, but I knew the truth. He had been inside, and he was getting closer. Jenna and I started locking every door, every window, every night. We even pushed furniture in front of the doors. I barely slept. My nerves were fried. I was jumping at every noise. But for a week, nothing happened. Then, one morning, I opened the fridge, and there it was, a plain hamburger, cut into perfect squares. I slammed the door shut so hard the shelves rattled. I backed away, heart hammering, bile rising in my throat. Jenna came running. I pointed at the fridge, unable to speak. She opened it, saw the plate, covered her mouth with her hand. "We're leaving," she whispered. We packed it under an hour. Jenna went to stay with her their parents. I moved into a short-term rental under a different name. I wanted to disappear. That night, my phone rang. An unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. I knew I shouldn't have answered, but my hands moved on their own, lifting the phone to my ear. Silence, then a slow, wet chewing sound. In a whisper, "You eat so naturally now." I threw the phone across the room. I never answered an unknown number again. I never stayed at one place for too long. I never ever eat hamburgers anymore. I live in a small town where everything closes early and most people keep to themselves. One of my favorite things to do is take late night walks. It's peaceful, quiet, and I rarely run into anyone. The town is well lit, and I always stick to main roads, so I've never felt unsafe. That changed one night. I was walking my usual route, past the closed bakery and the darkened windows of the pharmacy, when I noticed something odd. A man was walking toward me on the opposite sidewalk, but his stride was off. It was almost like he wasn't bending his knees, his steps mechanical and deliberate. He was looking straight ahead, not at me, not at anything, just staring forward, and I didn't think much of it at first. Some people are just weird, right? But then, as we passed each other, I got this overwhelming sense of wrongness. I don't know how else to describe it. My skin prickled, my stomach knotted, and my instincts screamed at me to keep walking, to not look back. I ignored them. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw something that still makes my blood run cold. The man had stopped. He was standing completely still in the middle of the sidewalk, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening for something, and then, without turning around, he started walking again. But this time, he was going back the way he came. That shouldn't have been so terrifying, but it was. His movements were just as stiff, his posture just as unnerving. It was like he had been placed on a track, walking a programmed path, and suddenly, the script had changed. I picked up my pace. My apartment was only a few blocks away. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. Then I heard it. Footsteps. I didn't need to turn around to know they belonged to him. They were too precise, too evenly spaced, too unnatural. I reached my building and yanked the door open, practically throwing myself inside. The second it shut behind me, I turned the lock and pressed myself against the wood, listening. Silence. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to peek through the peephole. The street outside was empty. The man was gone. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just some strange guy passing through town. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he was sick. I wanted to believe that. Then, the next night, I saw him again, standing across the street, not walking, not moving, just watching. I moved out 2 weeks later. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation, paranoia, maybe even just the lingering effects of fear from the night before. But the man wasn't a figment of my imagination. For 3 nights straight, he was there, always across the street from my apartment, never closer, never farther, just standing in the same spot, at the same time, never moving, never reacting. At first, I thought he was staring at me, but the longer I watched, the more I realized he wasn't looking at anything at all. His head was tilted just slightly, like he was listening again, like he was waiting. On the 4th night, I stopped looking. I shut my blinds, locked my doors, and forced myself to act like he wasn't out there. It didn't help. I could still feel him. The air in my apartment felt heavier, thick with the suffocating presence of something I couldn't explain. I didn't sleep that night, and then on the 5th night, he was gone. I cracked the blinds open at 11 p.m. Nothing. That night, still nothing. By 1 a.m., I started to believe it was over, until I heard a sound from the hallway outside my apartment. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, almost like footsteps, but they were too light, too measured, and they didn't move. They just stayed right outside my door. I sat frozen on my couch, staring at the door like it might fly off its hinges. My mind screamed at me to check the peephole, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Every nerve in my body told me not to look. Then something changed. The air in my apartment shifted, like the room itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. A whisper, not words, not a voice I could recognize, just something low and broken, like the sound of static through an old radio. It came from right outside the door, creeping in through the wood, slipping beneath the frame. I was shaking. My hands were cold, my breath uneven. Every single instinct screamed at me to stay still, to not move, to not breathe too loudly. And then, just like that, it stopped. The air returned to normal. The pressure lifted, and when I finally worked up the courage to check the peephole, the hallway was empty. The man never came back after that. What the strangest part, the next morning, I asked my neighbor, an old man who had lived in the building for over 30 years, if he had ever seen anything weird around here, if he had ever noticed a man standing outside, or heard noises in the hallways at night. He gave me a strange look and shook his head. No, he said, frowning, but I'll tell you something, you're not the first tenant in that apartment to ask me that. I moved out that weekend. I don't know who or what the man was. I don't know if he was real, if he was something else entirely, or if my mind twisted some coincidence into a waking nightmare. But I do know one thing. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That moving out put an end to whatever had been following me. But things don't work that cleanly, do they? For a while, it seemed like it did. My new place was across town in a busier area. More people, more noise. It felt safer. I told myself it was over, and for a few months, it was. Then, one night, I was walking home from a late shift at work. The air was cold, the streets wet from a recent rain. The city felt alive, the way only cities do at night. Traffic lights flickering, distant sirens, the hum of people in bars and restaurants. And then, between all of that, a familiar sound. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped mid-step. My stomach dropped. My skin prickled with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my throat. At first, I didn't see anything, just a street lamp casting a pool of yellow light onto the wet sidewalk. A few parked cars, the entrance to an alleyway. Then I saw him, standing just beyond the glow of the street light, where the darkness was thickest. The man, he wasn't moving. He wasn't walking toward me. He was just standing there, half shrouded in shadow, his head tilted ever so slightly, listening. The wrongness of it hit me like a brick to the chest. I took a step back. He took a step forward. I didn't wait. I turned and walked fast, faster than I ever had before. My heart was in my throat, my breath short and ragged. I could hear footsteps behind me, steady, even, perfectly paced. I didn't dare look back. I made it to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked it. My whole body was trembling, my fingers ice cold. I pressed my ear against the door, silent. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that. I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that it was just a coincidence. But I do. And then 2 days later, I got a text, a number I didn't recognize. One word, listening. I don't know how he got my number. I don't know how he found me, but I do know one thing. No matter where I go, no matter how far I run, he will always be just a step behind, waiting, listening, and I don't think I'll ever be able to stop him. I used to work in a small, independent bookstore in a quiet town. It wasn't particularly old or famous, just a cozy little place with wooden shelves and a resident cat named Theo. The store sat at the far end of Birch Street, away from the busier parts of town, and at night, it always felt a little too quiet. My shifts usually ended around 10 p.m., and since my apartment was only a few blocks away, I'd walk home alone. It was never a problem, until the night I met Eddie. It started when I was closing up. I had just turned off the lights when I noticed movement outside the front window. A man stood there, just beyond the glow of the street lamp, watching me. He wasn't close enough for me to see his face clearly, but something about the way he stood, perfectly still, made my skin crawl. I hesitated, then stepped toward the door, trying to act like I hadn't seen him. Maybe he was just a late customer, disappointed we were closed. But as I reached for the lock, he moved just slightly, not stepping forward, not waving, just a shift of weight, like he was waiting for something. I locked the door quickly and turned off the open sign. I figured he'd get the message and leave, but he didn't. Instead, he drifted to the side of the store, disappearing out of sight. I waited a minute, heart hammering in my chest, before grabbing my bag and heading for the back exit. The alley behind the store was dimly lit, but it led straight to the main road. I stepped out cautiously, glancing both ways. Empty. I exhaled, feeling ridiculous for being so paranoid, and started walking. Halfway down the alley, I heard it. Footsteps, not behind me, not approaching, just there, like they were keeping pace with me, but from nowhere. They stopped, so did the footsteps. I took another step, so did they. The cold sweat broke out on my neck. I spun around, scanning the alley, but there was no one. No one in the shadows, no one near the dumpsters, no one in the recessed doorway of the old bakery. I forced myself to move faster, nearly jogging as I reached the street. I didn't stop until I was at my apartment door, slamming it shut behind me and bolting every lock. I barely slept that night. The next evening, I told my manager what had happened. She gave me a sympathetic look but shrugged it off as a one-time encounter. Probably just some weirdo, she said. We'll keep an eye out. That night, I left work with Theo in my arms. One of the perks of working there was that I could take him home when I closed. He purred in my jacket as I walked. The street was empty, the bookstore dark behind me. And then I saw him again, not standing on the sidewalk this time, standing in the bookstore. The lights were off, the door was locked, I knew that. But there he was, standing in the darkness between the shelves, just barely visible through the window. And he was looking at me. I bolted. I don't remember getting home, but I do remember locking myself in my bedroom. Theo still clutched in my arms, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The next day, I called out of work. When I finally returned, 2 days later, my manager was waiting for me with a frown. You didn't lock up properly the other night, she said. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? She gestured to the back exit. The door was unlocked when I came in the next morning. I felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. I knew I had locked it. I quit that same week. A few months later, the bookstore closed for good. But sometimes, when I pass by the empty building, I swear I still see him, standing there, watching and waited. A few months after I quit, the bookstore officially shut down. The owner had been struggling financially for a while, and I guess my creepy encounter was just another reason to leave it behind. For a while, I avoided Birch Street completely. I took longer routes to work, dodging the eerie feeling that always lingered when I thought about the store. But time passed, and the fear dulled, at least I thought it did. One evening, I was walking home from a late shift at my new job when I found myself near Birch Street without thinking. The street was quieter than I remembered, the bookstore now dark and lifeless with a for lease sign in the dusty front window. The sight gave me a strange sense of relief. Maybe the man, whatever he was, had moved on too. Then I saw the door. It was open, just slightly, barely an inch, but open enough that the darkness inside seemed to bleed out into the street. A cold wave of dread washed over me. This door had been empty for months. There was no reason for that door to be open. I told myself to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't seen it, but then something shifted inside the store. A flicker of motion, like someone moving between the empty shelves. I should have run. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then something stepped into the doorway. Not a person, at least, not fully. The shape was wrong. Tall, too tall for the frame, its head nearly brushing the top. Its shoulders were narrow, its limbs elongated, and its face. I still don't know what I saw. It wasn't a mask, wasn't a shadow. It was something empty, like looking into a place where a person should be, but wasn't. And then it moved, not toward me, but closer somehow, without stepping forward. Like the space between us had shrunk in an instant. I stumbled backward, my body finally kicking into motion. My hand scrambled for my phone, but I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. I turned and ran. I don't remember getting home. I just remember locking my door, shutting every curtain, and curling up on my bed with Theo pressed against my chest, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. That night, I barely slept, but in the few minutes I did, I dreamed of the bookstore, of it, watching it, waited. I moved out of that town a few weeks later. I never told anyone what I saw, and I never looked back. But sometimes, when I pass by a darkened storefront, when I see a door just barely ajar, I get that same feeling in my gut, like something is waiting, watching, still looking for me. I moved 3 towns over, started fresh, new job, new apartment, new routine. I even convinced myself that what happened on Birch Street was some kind of waking nightmare, a trick of exhaustion and fear. For a while, things were normal, until they worked. It started small, a feeling of being watched when I walked home, lights flickering just as I passed by, like Cat, Theo, hissing at the front door for no reason. Then, the dreams came back. Not dreams, the same dream. I'm standing in front of the bookstore again. The door is open just a crack. I know I shouldn't go inside, but something is pulling me forward. I step inside. The shelves are empty, the air thick with dust, but in the back of the store, in the shadows, something is waiting. I wake up gasping, my heart pounding, every time, just before I see its face. At first, I told myself it was just stress, that I was still haunted by what happened, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the real world sign started. One evening, after a late shift, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it when I left. My stomach nodded as I pushed the door open, but everything inside looked normal. Nothing was stolen, nothing was out of place. The only thing different, Theo was hiding under the bed, his fur bristled, his eyes wide with terror. I locked the door, checked every room, every closet. Nothing, but I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I asked my landlord if maintenance had come in while I was gone. He shook his head. There would have been inside. That's when I knew. I hadn't escaped it. A week later, I got home from work and found a book sitting on my kitchen table. A book I did not own. It was old, too old. The pages yellowed, the spine cracked. There was no title, no author, just a single sentence scrawled across the first page in jagged, uneven handwriting. He left the door open. I slammed the book shut, my pulse roaring in my ears. I had never brought this book into my apartment. I grabbed Theo, shoved him into his carrier, and left. I didn't pack, didn't think. I just left. I checked into a hotel that night and didn't go back for 3 days. When I finally returned, I half expected my apartment to be ransacked, or worse, for the book to be gone. But no, it was still there, sitting in the exact same place on my kitchen table. I moved out that week. I don't know what it was. I don't know how it followed me, but I know one thing. It's not just a man. It never was. And I don't think it's done with me yet. So if you ever find yourself walking past a bookstore at night, one that feels too quiet, too empty, keep walking. I never liked planetariums. Something about the darkness, the simulated sky, and the way the room feels larger than it should be always unsettled me. But when my friend Jenna begged me to go with her to a special late night showing at our local planetarium, I gave in. It was a one-night only event, an exclusive screening of a newly discovered star system, supposedly accompanied by a special surprise. The promotional flyer was vague, but Jenna was excited, and I didn't want to be the boring friend. The place wasn't crowded, maybe a dozen people scattered throughout the vast dome-shaped theater. Jenna and I took took seats near the back, directly in the center. The air smelled slightly stale, like old carpet and something metallic. The show began normally enough, the usual deep voice narrator explaining cosmic formations as the ceiling transformed into a sea of stars. I let myself relax. The visuals were mesmerizing. Then, the special surprise segment started. The narrator's voice cut out mid-sentence. The screen went completely black. I expected an effect, maybe a simulated blackout to make the stars pop more dramatically. Instead, silence stretched long enough that people began shifting in their seats. Then a single point of white light appeared on the ceiling. A star. No, it wasn't twinkling. It grew larger, brighter, until it was the size of the full moon. And then it blinked. Not flickered, blinked. A slow, deliberate movement. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Someone laughed nervously. The eye, because that's what it was, an enormous eye, began scanning the room. Its gaze drifted across the seats, searching. I squeezed Jenna's arm. What the hell is this? She didn't answer. I turned to her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the row ahead of us. There was a man sitting there. I hadn't noticed him before, and something about him didn't feel right. His head was tilted back too far, like his neck was broken, staring directly at the blinking eye above us. He was smiling. No one else seemed to notice him. The eye moved again, faster this time. It darted between audience members, the light from it illuminating their faces in sharp contrast. Each time it stopped on someone, they flinched or shifted uncomfortably as if feeling some unseen pressure. Then it stopped on me. I swear to God, I felt it. A horrible, cold weight settled over me, pressing against my chest like something unseen was leaning in. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. My limbs refused to respond. The man in front of me let out a slow, rattling laugh. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the screen cut back to a normal starry sky. The narrator's voice resumed mid-sentence, as if nothing had happened. The audience shuffled awkwardly. People chuckled, whispered about how creepy that segment was. But the man in front of me, he was gone. Jenna and I bolted out of the theater the second the lights came up. We didn't talk until we were outside, under the safety of real stars. I don't think that was part of the show, she finally said. I agreed. We never found out what that special surprise was supposed to be. I checked online later. There were no mentions of a late night event at the planetarium. No advertisements, no records, nothing. And here's the part that keeps me up at night. A few days later, I was scrolling through my photos when I found one I don't remember taking. It's blurry, grainy, like it was snapped in motion. But I know what it is. The last row of the planetarium, and in the center of the frame, sitting in my seat, was me. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to make sense of it. It had to be a glitch, a trick of the light, maybe a reflection. But no, the figure in the seat was unmistakably me. Same jacket, same posture, same damn way I sit with one hand on my knee. I checked the metadata. The timestamp said it was taken 7 minutes after we left the planetarium. My stomach turned. I hadn't taken this. Jenna wouldn't have taken this. And even if she had, how would it show me sitting there when I was already outside? I showed it to her the next day, and the second she saw it, she turned pale. Delete it, she whispered. What? Delete it? There was something raw in her voice, something I'd never heard before. I hesitated for a second, but then did it. I deleted the photo from my gallery, went into the trash folder, and wiped it for good measure. Jenna exhaled in relief. Good, it's gone. But that night, at exactly 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. New photos saved to your gallery. My throat closed up. My hands were clammy as I opened my gallery, dreading what I would see. It was the same picture, same angle, same me. Only this time, I wasn't alone. There was someone sitting next to me. I wish I could tell you what they looked like, but I can't. My mind will hold on to the details. Every time I try to focus, it's like my brain refuses to process their face, like the image won't let me remember. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Jenna wouldn't answer my calls. I finally drove to her apartment, knocking until she let me in. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembling. I got one too, she said before I could even ask. She held up her phone. It was my seat in the planetarium again, but this time, the figure sitting there wasn't me. It was her. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what we sat through that night, but we haven't gone back to the planetarium. And every night at 2:17 a.m., a new photo appears on my phone. Each time, the image is a little clearer. Each time, the thing sitting next to me looks a little closer. And last night, I swear to God, I felt something breathe on the back of my neck. I didn't sleep at all last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear something faint, like the shuffle of fabric against a seat, like someone shifting in the darkness behind me. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The photo had changed. It was still the planetarium, still my seat, still that figure sitting next to me, only this time, I could almost see its face. The details were still blurred, like a corrupted file, but it had shifted its posture. It was leaning forward slightly, facing the camera, face away. I dropped my phone and scrambled away from it like it had burned me. My heart was hammering in my chest, my skin ice cold. I called Jenna, but she didn't pick up. up. I called again. Nothing. Something was wrong. I grabbed my keys and drove to her apartment as fast as I could. Her car was in the lot. Lights off. Curtains drawn in. I knocked. No answer. I pounded harder. Jenna, it's me. Open the door. Still nothing. I don't know what possessed me to try the handle, but I did. I turned easily. Unlocked. Inside, the apartment was silent. Too silent. No humming appliances. No street noise. Nothing. Just a thick, suffocating stillness. Jenna's phone was on the counter. The screen was on, stuck on her gallery. I picked it up with shaking hands. There was a new photo. Her seat at the planetarium, but Jenna wasn't in it. Instead, the thing in the seat was now sitting alone. No blurred features. No distortion. It was fully visible, and it was smiling. I read. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, locking the doors, gasping for breath. I didn't know what to do. Who to call? The police. What the hell would I tell them? Jenna was gone, and whatever had taken her had left a message. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but my body moved on its own. A live notification from my camera. Face detected and tap to view. I was alone in the car. I didn't tap. I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, pulse pounding in my ears. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A slow, deliberate exhale right behind me. I'm writing this from a motel on the edge of town. I don't know what to do. I don't know where Jenna is. I don't even know if she's still Jenna anymore. And worst of all, tonight's photo has already appeared. It's a picture of my seat at the planetarium, and this time it's empty. I was never one for fancy gifts, but when my sister gifted me a voucher for a private calligraphy lesson, I figured, why not? It was something different. The place was a tiny, unassuming shop sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a locksmith in a part of town I didn't usually visit. When I arrived, the door was slightly ajar, and a small brass bell jingled as I stepped inside. The air smelled of ink and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with ornate pens, parchment, and delicate bottles of ink. A single large table sat in the middle, covered in parchment scraps and an array of nibs and brushes. At the far end of the shop, a man was seated with his back to me, writing with slow, deliberate strokes. Hello, I called softly. He didn't turn right away. Instead, he finished the stroke he was working on before placing the pen down with a careful precision. Then, he rose smoothly and turned to face me. The man was old but not frail. He had an odd, statuesque stillness about him, his posture unnervingly straight. His suit was immaculate, but what stood out the most was his face. It wasn't disfigured or grotesque, nothing so obvious, but something about it was off, as though it was too symmetrical, too smooth, like a face you'd see at a painting rather than on a living person. You must be the student, he said in a voice that was deep and measured. I nodded and introduced myself. He simply gestured for me to sit. The lesson began normally enough. He explained different techniques, demonstrated how to hold the pen, how to control pressure, but then he took out a roll of parchment, older than the ones I had seen before. The edges were slightly curled, tinged with a yellowish hue. Try copying this, he instructed, rolling it out in front of me. The script was intricate, winding letters unlike any language I recognized. They were beautiful, almost hypnotic in the way they twisted and looped together. What language is this? I asked. His lips barely curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It is old. That was all he said. I should have left then, but I didn't. I dipped the pen into the ink, hesitating only a second before copying the first character. The moment my pen touched the parchment, I felt it, a shift, a static-like pressure in the air, as if the room itself exhaled. My fingers tingled, and an unexplainable unease crept up my spine. I forced myself to keep writing, but with each stroke, the room felt tighter. The shadows stretched strangely. The air grew thick, like I was underwater. My heart pounded, and then something moved. Not the man, not me. The ink, it slithered, just slightly, like something beneath it was shifting. I gasped, dropping the pen, and pushed back from the table. The man watched me, expression unchanged. You feel it, don't you? I could only stare at the parchment. The letters I had written, imperfect and clumsy, were gone. The rest of the script remained, but my additions had vanished completely, as if they had been absorbed. I didn't ask questions. I stood abruptly, muttered something about needing to leave, and backed away. The man tilted his head. You are not finished, he said, but I was already at the door. I yanked it open and stumbled outside, barely hearing the bell jingle behind me. The moment I was out, the suffocating pressure lifted. I turned back only once. Through the shop's window, the man was still seated, watching me. The parchment was in front of him, and I swear, I saw it move. I don't know what I wrote. I don't want to know. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I left and life returned to normal, but it didn't. That night, I dreamt of ink, thick, black ink seeping through my fingers, pulling onto a page I couldn't see. It dripped in slow, heavy drops, spelling out words in a language I didn't understand, and underneath the ink, something was moving, shifting, watching. I woke up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. The next morning, my first instinct was to throw out everything from the lesson, the pen, the parchment scraps, even the clothes I wore that day. But when I reached into my bag to grab them, the parchment wasn't there. I knew I had taken it. I remembered shoving it into my bag before leaving, but it was gone. At work, I felt like I wasn't alone, even when I was. A weight pressed between my shoulders, like something unseen was standing just behind me, watching. Several times, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, just a flicker, just a shadow, but when I turned, nothing was there. By nightfall, I was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. When I finally drifted off, the dreams returned. This time, I wasn't just watching the ink, I was writing. In the dream, my hand moved against my will, dipping a quill into an inkwell and dragging it across parchment. I could feel the rough texture of the paper, the smooth glide of the ink. I couldn't stop. Letter by letter, I traced the symbols, and as I wrote, I felt something stir. Somewhere in the distance, a whisper, not a voice, something older, something deeper. It rumbled beneath my skin, curling around my ribs like unseen fingers. I woke up with a start, my hand cramping, and that was when I saw it. On my bedside table, where I knew I had left nothing, sat a fresh piece of parchment. On it, in my own handwriting, were the same symbols from the lesson. I lost my mind a little after that. I skipped work, kept the lights on, threw out every pen and notebook I owned. I didn't care if it was irrational, I wasn't taking any chances. And still, the dreams continued. Every night, I wrote. Every morning, a new parchment would be waiting. I tried to destroy them, burn them, tear them, throw them into water, but it never mattered. They always came back, pristine and untouched. After a week, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept. I barely ate. It felt like something was burrowing into my thoughts, carving out pieces of me to make room for it. I had to go back. The shop looked the same, like nothing had happened. I hesitated at the door, hand trembling on the handle. The bell jingled when I stepped inside. The air still smelled of ink and old paper, but the table was empty. The calligrapher wasn't there. I stepped forward, heart pounding, hello, no answer, a rustle, then a whisper. I turned sharply, but there was no one, just the shelves, the parchment, the pens. But something was wrong. I could hear the whispering, but it wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the pages, hundreds of them stacked neatly, bound in books, tucked into drawers. The ink on them was moving, shifting, like something underneath was breathing. I took a step back, and then I saw it. On the center table, waiting for me, was a single blank parchment. A pen rested beside it, uncapped, ink glistening. The whispering grew louder, urgent, and beneath it, layered within the murmur of shifting ink, I heard something else. My own voice, writing, then finishing. I read. I don't know how I made it home. I don't know if I was followed. I don't know if I ever really left that shop. All I know is that the dream stopped after that, but sometimes, late at night, I wake up to find ink on my fingers. And no matter how many times I move apartments, no matter how many times I check, I always find a fresh piece of parchment waiting, and the whispering never really goes away. I stopped sleeping. It didn't matter how exhausted I was, I knew what waited for me when I closed my eyes. The whispering never stopped. Some nights, it was a low murmur, barely noticeable over the hum of the city. Other nights, it was relentless, pressing into my skull like ink seeping into paper. I'd wake up with my hands twitching, aching as if I'd been writing for hours. And always, there was the parchment. It followed me. I'd moved 3 times, threw out every page I found. And yet, the moment I let my guard down, there it was again, sitting on my desk, my kitchen counter, my bedside table. Waited. The writing had changed, though. It wasn't just the same symbols from before. It was my own handwriting now. Sometimes it was just a sentence. Other times, full pages of text I didn't remember writing. I stopped reading them after the first few, because the first time I did, I saw something I couldn't explain. I had written about things that hadn't happened yet, and then they did. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was some kind of elaborate stress-induced hallucination, that I was sleepwalking, writing in my sleep, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, one night, the whispering changed. It wasn't coming from the parchment anymore. It was coming from inside my apartment. I froze. It was past midnight. My lights were off, and I was alone. Or at least, I was supposed to be. The whispering wasn't a sound anymore. It was a presence. A shape pressing against the edges of the darkness. My heart pounded as I turned on the nearest light. The whispering stopped, but there was someone standing in my doorway. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A person. No, not a person. It was him, the calligrapher. He stood unnaturally still, the same eerie smoothness to his face, the same too perfect suit. His hands were folded in front of him, perfectly clean, perfectly composed. He shouldn't have been there. The door was locked. My apartment was on the the 5th floor. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, he raised one hand, a single finger pressed to his lips. A warning, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then he spoke. "You are nearly finished." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It cut through the air, through me. I shook my head, backing away. I don't know what you mean." He took a single step forward. "Your work is almost complete." I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt on my lips. "I don't want to write anymore," I whispered. His expression didn't change. "That is not for you to decide." Then he reached into his coat. He pulled out a pen, the same one I had used in the lesson, the same one I had left behind. He held it out to me. My body moved on its own, fingers curling, reaching. I tried to fight it, to stop, but my hands were no longer my own. I could hear the whispering inside me now. It wasn't coming from the ink. It was coming from my bones. I had to do something, so I did the only thing I could. I closed my eyes. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms, and I willed myself to wake up, to break free, to do anything but write. The whispering turned to a roar, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The calligrapher was gone. The whispering was gone, but the pen was still there, sitting on my desk, waiting. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the next. I was afraid to, because I knew, deep down, I knew that if I did, I would wake up to find myself writing again. That if I so much as picked up that pen, I would finish whatever I had started, and I didn't want to know what happened when I did. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Days, weeks. Time feels strange now. The whispering hasn't come back, but neither has the silence. I still see ink smudges on my fingers sometimes, even though I haven't touched a pen, and I still find the parchment, always blank, always waiting. I don't know what I was writing. I don't know who or what wanted me to finish. I was visiting my best friend, Lauren, who had just moved into an old brownstone apartment near the city center. The building was charming in that probably haunted but definitely overpriced kind of way. High ceilings, intricate crown molding, and a staircase that groaned no matter how lightly you stepped. Lauren had been there for about a month and loved it, except for one thing. "There's something weird about the stairwell mirror," she said one night as we sat on her floor eating takeout. "Every time I walk past it, I feel like I catch something in the reflection. Just for a second." I laughed. "Like what? A ghost?" She rolled her eyes. "No, just something." The mirror in question was huge, an old, gilded thing bolted to the wall on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors. It had probably been there since the building was constructed. I'd walked past it earlier, but nothing had seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of it. Later that night, when I was heading to bed in her guest room, I remembered I left my phone downstairs. I padded out into the hallway and toward the staircase. The whole building was dead silent. As I reached the landing, I slowed down, glancing at the mirror. My reflection was there, of course, but something about it unsettled me. I stepped closer. Everything looked normal. Dim hallway, peeling wallpaper, my own tired face staring back. Then I noticed something in the reflection behind me. A man. He was just barely visible at the edge of the frame, standing at the top of the stairs, half in shadow. I spun around instantly, my heart slamming against my ribs. There was no one there. I turned back to the mirror, but the reflection was normal again. Just the empty hallway stretching behind me. I felt sick. I practically ran back to Lauren's apartment, locked the door behind me, and stayed awake for hours listening for any sound outside. The next morning, I told Lauren what happened. She looked uneasy but not surprised. "That's why I hate that mirror," she admitted. "We decided to test something." I stood on the landing while she took a photo of the mirror. The first picture looked normal, just me, looking slightly nervous. Then we tried again. This time, I stepped to the side, leaving the reflection of the hallway empty, and there he was, a man, barely visible, standing at the top of the stairs. We both stared at the screen in horror. Lauren deleted the photo immediately. That was the last night I ever stayed there. Lauren moved out 6 months later. At first, I convinced myself that it had been a trick of the light, or some old flaw in the glass catching shadows in just the right way, but I knew better. We both did. For a while, things were quiet. Lauren found a new apartment across town, a place without old mirrors bolted to the walls or staircases that seemed to listen when you walked. We didn't talk about what had happened. It felt safer that way, as if ignoring it meant it couldn't follow us. Then, about a year later, she called me in the middle of the night. I saw him again. My stomach dropped. "Where?" She hesitated. "In my new place." But it was different this time. I didn't want to know, but I asked anyway. Lauren took a shaky breath. I was watching TV, and my phone was on the coffee table. The screen was black, like it had just timed out, but I could see the reflection of the room in it, and her voice broke for a second. He was there, standing in the doorway. I felt cold all over. "Lauren, are you sure? Maybe it was just..." I turned around, and he wasn't there, she said, but the reflection still showed him. gone. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I think he followed me." I wanted to tell her it was impossible, that things like that didn't happen in real life, but I couldn't. I'd seen him too. After that, Lauren stopped staying in one place for too long. Every few months, she'd move again, but no matter where she went, there were signs, reflections that didn't match reality, the shape at the edge of a darkened window, the feeling of someone watching when no one was there. The last time I heard from her was 2 months ago. She sent me a voice message, shaky, breathless. "I don't think moving works anymore," she said. "I don't think he's following me. I think he's with me." That was it. No goodbye, no explanation. I tried calling her back, but the number was disconnected. Her social media accounts were gone. It was like she had erased herself. And now I'm the one seeing things in the corner of my eye, catching glimpses of something just outside the edges of reflections. Last night, I woke up to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps outside my bedroom door. When I checked, no one was there, but in the hallway mirror, the door was still open, and he was standing just behind me. A week after that night, I convinced Lauren to talk to her landlord. Not that I expected much. Landlords aren't exactly known for their concern about creepy mirrors or potential apparitions, but to our surprise, he seemed oddly hesitant when she brought it up. He even avoided looking directly at the mirror when we mentioned it. Finally, he sighed and said, "Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but that mirror's been here longer than I have. Some things in this building, they just stay." That was it. No explanation, no reassurance, just a cryptic remark and a quick exit. Lauren and I decided to do our own digging. We searched old property records, local news archives, anything that might explain why that man was appearing in her mirror. And then we found something, a grainy black and white photo from the 1930s and an article about the brownstone's original tenants. It showed a group of men standing in the stairwell, dressed in old-fashioned suits. But there was something wrong with the image. One of the men, standing near the top of the stairs, was blurred, not like he had moved while the photo was taken, but like he shouldn't have been there at all. His features were smudged, indistinct, but I recognized the shape of him, the same shape I had seen in the mirror. The article didn't say much, just that the building had once been used as a boarding house. There were mentions of an incident, a man who went missing without a trace, but no follow-up, no resolution. Just another person who stayed. Lauren was done after that. She put in her notice and left within the month, staying with family until she found a new place. I helped her move out, and on our last trip down the stairs, we both paused in front of the mirror one final time. The reflection was empty, just us. For a second, I thought it was over, but then, just before we turned away, something in the mirror shifted. Not a figure this time, just a single fingerprint, appearing slowly on the glass, right at eye level. I didn't even think. I grabbed Lauren's wrist, and we bolted. To this day, I refuse to walk past that building, and I don't look too closely at mirrors anymore. When I was a kid, my grandparents lived near an old reservoir. It was a beautiful place, with glassy water stretching out between the hills, but there was always something eerie about it. Maybe it was the way the fog clung to the surface at dawn, or how the water lapped against the shore without a sound. The thing about that reservoir was that it used to be a town. Decades ago, the valley had been flooded to create a water supply, and the entire town, buildings, streets, even the church, was left beneath the surface. Most people didn't talk about it, but sometimes, on dry years when the water was low, you could see the tops of old buildings just under the surface. I had an uncle, Joe, who loved to tell stories about the drowned town. He said you could still hear the church bell ring on cold nights, even though it had been underwater for years. That was just an old tale, but there was one thing he told me that always stuck with me. If you ever see a man standing in the water, don't talk to them. Just turn around and walk away. I thought it was another spooky story until I saw him. It was late summer, and I had taken my bike down to the reservoir alone. The sun was starting to set, casting the water in deep orange and purple, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth. I was skipping rocks when I noticed something strange. Out in the water, maybe 20 feet from the shore, stood a man. At first, I thought he was just another visitor, maybe a fisherman. But the longer I looked, the more I realized something was wrong. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, half submerged, arms hanging at his sides. The water reached just below his chest, and his clothes were dark and heavy like an old-fashioned suit. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was looking at me. A deep, instinctive fear settled into my stomach. It was like my body understood something before my brain did. I took a step back. The man didn't move. Then, the water around him started to ripple, not like waves, but like something was shifting beneath the surface. I turned and ran. I pedaled home so fast I nearly crashed my bike. When I burst into my grandparents' house, gasping for breath, my uncle just looked at me. "You saw him, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. Uncle Joe took a deep breath and told me something I'll never forget. That town wasn't empty when they flooded it. Not everyone left in time. For years, I tried to convince myself that what I saw at the reservoir was just a trick of the light, a shadow, my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. I stayed away from the water. Even when my cousins went swimming or my uncle took his boat out to fish, I never set foot near that shore again. The thought of looking out and seeing him standing there, half submerged, waiting, no, I wasn't willing to take that risk. But the thing about ignoring something strange is that sometimes it doesn't ignore you. It was late one summer night when I woke up to the sound of dripping. At first, I thought it was the bathroom faucet. The house was old, and the pipes made noise sometimes. But as I sat up in bed, I realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from outside my window. A slow, steady drip, 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 like water spilling off something soaked. I hesitated before pulling the curtain back. The yard outside was empty, bathed in the weak light of the moon. The trees swayed gently, nothing out of place. But then I noticed it, wet footprints leading up to my window from the direction of the reservoir. My stomach dropped. The prints were large, the impressions deep, as if whoever left them had been carrying something heavy. They stopped right below my window. I didn't see anyone standing there, but the dripping sound continued. I backed away, heart pounding. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to hide, but I couldn't look away. Then, from the silence, I heard something that sent ice through my veins. A faint, distant clanging, like a rusted bell ringing underwater. The next morning, the footprints were gone. No wet patches, no signs of water anywhere. If it weren't for the fact that my sheets were still damp from my own sweat, I could have convinced myself I imagined it, but I didn't. That day, my uncle found me sitting on the porch, staring in the direction of the reservoir. He sat down next to me and lit a cigarette, waiting. He followed you, didn't he? He finally asked. I didn't answer. Uncle Joe exhaled smoke, his expression unreadable. That's how it starts. First you see him, then he finds his way to you. I turned to look at him, fear bubbling in my chest. How do I stop it? My uncle didn't say anything for a long time. Then he crushed his cigarette beneath his boot and stood up. You don't go near the water, and you never answer when he calls. I moved away from my grandparents' town not long after that summer. I never went back to the reservoir, never walked along its shores again. Years passed, and the memory of that night became something I only thought about in the quiet moments when I was alone in the dark. Until last year, I was visiting my parents when I decided to take a drive through my old childhood town just to see what had changed. The reservoir was still there, of course, still eerily still shrouded in mist that clung to the surface. I wasn't planning to stop. I told myself I was just passing through, but then, just as I was about to turn back onto the highway, my headlights caught something standing at the water's edge. A man. His clothes were the same, old and dark, soaked to the bone. His posture was the same, arms limp, head slightly tilted, as if he were waiting. And though I was inside my car, safe, my blood ran cold when I realized one horrible thing. He was closer than before, no longer standing deep in the water, no longer 20 feet away. Now, he was right at the shoreline, right at the edge of the road. And this time, I saw his face. It wasn't bloated, or rotted, or decayed like you'd expect from something that had spent decades underwater. It was just wrong, empty, like something had forgotten how to be human but was still trying to wear a person's skin. His mouth was slightly open, like he was about to speak. And the bell rang, not from a church tower, not from anything visible. It rang from inside my head, loud and echoing, vibrating in my skull, shaking my teeth. My vision blurred. I don't remember turning the wheel, but suddenly I was speeding away from the reservoir, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop until I reached my parents' house, doors locked, lights on. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't gone back since, but sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear dripping outside my window. And once, just once, I could have sworn I heard a bell ring. I moved again, far away this time, and thousands of miles from that reservoir, from the town, from anything that could connect me back to them. I told myself I was safe, that whatever haunted those waters couldn't reach me here. And for a while, it seemed to work. Until last week, it started small, a faint ringing in my ears, like the distant echo of a church bell. I chalked it up to stress, ignored it. But then, the other sound started, dripping, always at night. I checked the pipes, the faucets, the air conditioning. Nothing was leaking, nothing should have been making that sound. But still, there it was, drip, drip, drip. Then, I began waking up to damp footprints in my apartment. At first, I thought I had tracked in water from outside, but that didn't make sense. The footprint started in the middle of the floor. No trail leading in from the door, no source of water, just wet, heavy impressions that faded by morning. And the worst part, they were getting closer to my bed. 2 nights ago, I woke up to a noise. Not dripping, not the bell. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I froze. I live alone. I reached for my phone, my heart pounding, my pulse hammering in my ears. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Then, a single, deliberate knock. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The knock came again, softer this time, and then the water began seeping under the door. Cold, dark, and possibly deep water spreading across the floor toward me. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the water pooled around my feet. It should have soaked my bed, my clothes, but it didn't. It just sat there, cold and waiting. Then, something shifted, a shadow under the door. Not a person, not something human. And just before I lost my nerve and bolted, I heard it. A voice. Hello's wrong. Come back. I don't remember jumping out of bed. I don't remember running into the bathroom and slamming the door shut. But I remember standing there, shaking, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Water dripped from my hair, but I hadn't stepped in any. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the water was gone. No footprints, no puddles, no evidence that anything had happened. But I knew better. I packed a bag, called a friend, told them I needed to stay with them for a while. I don't know if running will help. I don't know if distance makes a difference anymore. Because last night, before I left, I heard it again. A deep, distant ringing, not from a church, not from the street, from inside my apartment, inside my head. And when I turned to look at the front door, I saw something, a reflection in the peephole. Dark, soaked, waited. I don't think I can outrun him anymore. So, to the man in the drowned village, please. I used to love the rain, not in the poetic, dance in the storm kind of way. I just liked the way it muted the world, softened everything into a blur. It made things feel smaller, quieter, safer. That was before I met him. I was driving home late one evening from my friend's place, about a 40-minute trip to the windy back roads of my town. The forecast hadn't called for rain, but as I hit the halfway mark, the first few drops tapped against my windshield. Within minutes, it had escalated into a full downpour. My wipers struggled to keep up, and I slowed down, focusing on the white lines of the road. That's when I saw him, a lone figure, walking along the side of the road. No umbrella, no raincoats, just a thin shirt, jeans, and an odd sort of gait, one that wasn't quite a limp, but wasn't normal either. His head was tilted down, and his arms hung limp at his sides. I drove past him, barely sparing another glance. About 10 minutes later, my stomach dropped. I saw him again. Same clothes, same slumped posture, same odd gait. It was impossible. There had been no turnoffs, no shortcuts, just trees and fields and an unbroken stretch of road. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had just imagined passing him earlier. Maybe it was a different person. But as I drove past, something in me knew it was the same man. I sped up. 15 minutes left. The rain only got heavier, hammering my windshield like nails. The radio crackled with static, and my headlights struggled to cut through the storm. I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Then, ahead in the distance, no. He was there again. This time, he was standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. My car skidded, tires screaming against the wet pavement, stopping just feet away from him. For the first time, he lifted his head, and he smiled. It wasn't right. His mouth stretched too far, his lips thin and cracked. His teeth were wrong, some too small, some too big, some jagged like they'd been broken and never healed properly. I threw the car into reverse, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. As I backed up, my headlights flickered just for a second, and in that second, he moved. Not walked, not ran, he just moved from the front of my car to my driver's side window. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe as he leaned down, then tapped once, twice, 3 times. I didn't look, I didn't dare. I just slammed the gas and sped past him, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the road ahead. I just drove. By the time I reached my house, the rain had stopped. My driveway was dry, but my car wasn't. It was soaked, like it had just driven through a storm that didn't exist. I locked my doors, checked my windows, stayed awake until the first light of dawn. I haven't seen him since, but sometimes when it rains, I hear a faint tap once, twice, 3 times. I don't check the window, and I don't think I ever will. For a while after that night, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Stress, fatigue, the trick of the light and rain. But then, the tapping started happening inside. The first time, I was in my bedroom, half asleep, with rain pattering softly against my window. I had been doing a good job of ignoring my paranoia, convincing myself I was just overreacting, until I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from outside. It was from my closet door. I froze, every muscle in my body locking into place. My breath caught in my throat, and my stomach turned to ice. I told myself it was nothing. The house settling, the rain playing tricks on my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the blanket over my head like a child. But the next morning, my closet door was open, just a crack, and my carpet, which should have been dry, was wet. It didn't stop there. A week later, I was showering, letting the hot water soothe my nerves, trying to wash the fear away. The steam curled around me, light fogging up the mirror. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. My heart nearly stopped. It was light, almost playful, from the other side of the shower curtain. I whipped it open. Nothing. Just steam and empty air. But when I turned to the mirror, something was wrong. The steam had cleared in 3 small, perfect circles, like fingertips that pressed against the glass, like something had been watching me. The last time I heard it was at work. I was staying late at my office, a tiny cubicle job in a half-empty building. It was raining again, harder this time, and most of my coworkers had already left. I kept my headphones in, trying to focus, trying to pretend like everything was fine. Then my screen flickered, and my headphones cut out. Silence. Then tap, tap, tap. My stomach twisted. Slowly, I pulled my headphones off, barely breathing. It was coming from the cubicle behind me. I turned my chair just enough to peek over the divider. No one was there, but there was a puddle of water on the carpet, still fresh, still wet. I grabbed my things and ran. I don't know what he is. I don't know why he follows me, but I know one thing. He only comes when it rains. So now, when I see dark clouds roll in, when I smell the storm on the wind, I leave. I drive. I go where the sky is clear, and I pray that wherever he is, he stays in the rain. I wish that had been the end of it. I really do. For a while, my plane worked. If I saw rain in the forecast, I found somewhere dry. I spent weekends in the desert, took sudden road trips south, anything to stay ahead of the storm. It was exhausting, but it was safe. Until the rain found me anyway. It was late November, and the sky had been clear all day. Not a single cloud. I had let myself relax, just a little, thinking I could finally breathe again. I was at a small roadside motel, just passing through on my way to visit family. At 2:46 a.m., I woke up to the sound of rain. Not a drizzle, not a gentle storm rolling in from the distance. It was a downpour, sudden, violent. I bolted upright in bed, my pulse hammering in my throat. No, this wasn't right. I had checked the forecast. There was no rain scheduled for miles. But outside, I could hear it hammering against the windows, gushing from the motel's drain pipes, pooling in the parking lot. I reached for my phone, fumbling with the screen, checking the weather app with shaking hands. Clear skies. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the sheets, my mind racing. Okay. Maybe it was a freak storm. Maybe that. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the motel room door. I nearly choked on air. No, I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The door had a peephole. I could have looked. I did not. I sat there, frozen, counting my breaths, listening. The rain kept falling. Minutes passed, an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won, and at some point, I must have drifted into a fitful sleep. When I woke up, the rain was gone. The parking lot outside was dry. The air smelled like dust and pavement, like it hadn't seen a drop of water in weeks. And on the floor, just inside my door, was a single wet footprint. I don't know what to do anymore. Running isn't working. Avoiding the rain isn't enough, because now, it's following me even when the sky is clear. And last night, for the first time, I heard it from inside my apartment. A slow, deliberate, unmistakable sound. Tap, 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 right outside my bedroom door. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.